Hello, I'm Matt Kropp with the Vermont Employee Ownership Center, and we're going to be having an interesting webinar today, learning about the practice of sociocracy as a way of running an organization. So I'm excited to have presenting and discussing this system, Jerry Koch-Gonzalez, who runs a number of kind of groups and organizations and is very experienced in this. So, Jerry, do you want to give a brief overview of the of kind of your background and what we'll be discussing today?
Okay. Well, thank you, Matt. So, Jerry Koch-Gonzalez. I am the CEO of a consulting company called the Sociocracy Consulting Group. I'm also project manager for a nonprofit, for a part of a nonprofit called Sociocracy for All. Both of those entities trying to bring sociocracy to the world, and of course this seminar will explain what sociocracy is. I live in a cooperative housing community called Pioneer Valley Co-Housing in Amherst, Massachusetts. We are, as a community, we are also organized sociocratically. And I come to this work from having taught consensus for years in the past. I come to this work from the perspective of being a social change activist and sometimes a worker in different kinds of co-ops, looking for how do we actually walk the talk of egalitarianism? How do we self-manage our organizations to really be the change that we want to see in the world? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So do you want to just continue, or is there something else you want to say here, Matt?
Yeah, I think if you want to bring up the presentation, we'll run through, and then once you're done, we should have some space for questions and answers. And for folks who are watching, it looks like we got about 20 people viewing right now. Well, if you find the event on Facebook, and if you have any questions and are not going to be coming on the, there's a link if you'd like to join the Q&A session there. So if you go to the Vermont Employee Ownership Center's Facebook page, there's an event, and then the link to the Hangout itself should be there. So after the presentation, we'll have some Q&A, and you can either join directly, or if you want to leave a comment on the event page, I can pass that along to Jerry as well.
Okay, so I'm going to do a slideshow, and maybe we have an hour and a half for this time. Maybe half of it will be presentation, and we'll take the other half for a Q&A. I believe this is open to anybody showing up, so people from anywhere in the country or the world might be watching. I'm aware that this is supported by the Vermont Employee Ownership Centers, so if you take Q&A, I don't know if you can prioritize Vermont people, but I leave that to you. Maybe I'll just say first sociocracy, because it's that word which we're not familiar with, many of us. It's similar to the word sociology. Both words were coined by the same French philosopher Auguste Comte back in the 1850s. Of course, sociocracy was not popular, did not become popular until, now it's becoming more well known. And what does it mean? Sociocracy means governance by the socios. So ocracy, governance, socios, or the associates. So governance by the associates, those who work together, as opposed to democracy, governance by the people, or autocracy, plutocracy, governance by the one or by the few. So I'm going to start the slideshow here. Let's see if this is getting me what I want. Are we there, Matt? Is this are we seeing what I want to see? Good. Okay. So what is dynamic? Oh, the other name for sociocracy that we sometimes use is dynamic governance. You use that term sometimes just because the word sociocracy brings some fear into people who think this might be socialism. It also brings some fear into some people who think this is ocracy, power over. So both kind of, from concern on the left or the right, sometimes there's challenges with that word. So sometimes we call it dynamic governance. And dynamic meaning it's changeable, it's not static, it responds to to the process of people dialoguing together. So sociocracy, governance by the socios, those who associate together. Sociocracy is an effective participatory decision-making process based on equivalence of power of all participants, regardless of their position in an organization's managerial hierarchy. So that's kind of the core element, is egalitarianism. And this comes from the origins of sociocracy, which starts off in a Quaker school in the Netherlands. Quakers have the philosophy that everyone's voice matters. You know, there's that of God in each one of us. So that's the egalitarian kind of source of it. And I'll just sort of go on from there. I won't say everything that's on these slides, and I'll be skipping through some of these slides because I've got more slides than we'll have time for. So why use sociocracy or dynamic governance? To improve the decision-making and the workflow, to give everyone a voice and influence, to support the triple bottom line. We want to care about our clients and consumers. We want to care about our workers and investors. We want to care about our community and environment. And to serve as a model towards building a resilient, sustainable, cooperative economy and society. So sometimes I say that sociocracy is the operating system for the new economy. We'll see more what that means. Begin with the aim in mind. Whenever we think about organizations, first we need to think about what's the purpose of this organization? What's this organization trying to do? So every organization and every unit of that organization has an aim, a specific expression of the organization's mission. So the aim is basically producing something or providing a service. So then when we look at decision-making in an organization, we're going to look at how does this decision support the achievement of the organization's aim. That's the framework of how we evaluate decisions. This is important because we always want to remember that the clarity of the aim is critical. Maybe a couple of examples of aim. When we think about Habitat for Humanity, for example, they're an organization, and you might say that their mission is to end homelessness. Their aim is to build housing for and by the homeless within a particular town. But there might be another organization like Real Change or Spare Change that produces a newspaper produced by the homeless to do educational work. Their mission is also to end homelessness, but their aim is different. Their aim is education, not to building the houses. There might yet be another organization that does lobbying at the State House for issues of homelessness. So their mission, again, end homelessness, but their aim is lobbying to produce a reduction in homelessness. So the clarity of the aim is really critical. I'll pass through a couple of these. So when I think about sociocracy, there's three basic elements. There is the organizational structure, there is the decision-making process, and then there is the learning cycle or the continual adaptation. So I'm going to talk about each one of these. And we'll start with consent, with the decision-making process, which is by consent, as opposed to decision-making by consensus or decision-making by majority rule. In the process of decision-making, one of the things that we do is we do a lot of rounds. We go around the circle so that we hear from everyone. Why do we do rounds? Because rounds support equivalence. Each person's voice matters. In some of the traditional ways that we sit around in a meeting, we call on people, and then there's debate that happens. You know, person A speaks, person B, disagrees, person A speaks again, and so we have a debate process. We try to avoid that in sociocracy by using rounds a lot. So we go around and hear from each person. That way, the quiet people get a chance to speak. The people who talk a lot have more containment for their process. So so you can just scroll through this to the next slide. We have decision making by consent, we do rounds, and I'll explain more of these. There are 3 phases of the decision-making process. Picture forming, proposal shaping, and decision making, the actual consent decision at the end of the process. So picture forming is we're going to present whatever the issue is, and I'm going to use an example from living community because that's the one I know best, and hopefully it won't confuse things too much talking about ownership of worker places. So here is, I live in a co-housing community, as I said before. So, for example, there's an issue of dogs in the community. What are all the different things that we need to think about if we want to come up with a policy that governs dogs in the community? So what are all the dimensions of the issue? And we'll start naming them. Obviously, barking, poop, biting, companionship, conflict, on leash or not. So these are all the different considerations that would go into policy making. Once you've got that complete, then you can move on to the next phase, which is generating proposal ideas. Okay, dogs should be on leash, owner should pick up poop, etc. So you make a list of different proposal ideas, and then you start shaping them into a proposal. Okay, here we go. Proposal. When the dog is out of the house, I won't go into the details, but here's a kind of a sample pieces of the proposal. This is actually the policy that we have in my own community. When you've got a proposal ready, it's covered all the dimensions that you originally addressed. Okay, now you're ready for the actual decision making. Some of this process may be happening in a committee, and then they bring their proposal to the body that's going to make the decision. In the decision-making process, you start with, you present the proposal and its rationale. Then you do your first round, your clarifying questions. So you go around and hear from each person in that group that's making the decision, do you understand the proposal? If not, ask a question. Then the next round is the quick reaction round. And by quick reaction round, I mean 5 sentences or less. I like this proposal, or, well, I like it except for point number 6, that one should be different in this way, I think, or, hey, I really object to this. This is not going to meet our needs. It's not going to serve our aim. So that's just a quick reaction round. And then we do the consent round. And the phrase, well, the consent round, and then finally, you've made a decision, announce it, and celebrate. The question, let's see, what do I have here? Okay, the consent questions. What are the questions that we would be asking when we're looking at consent? Does this proposal support the circle, the group that's making this decision, and its members in accomplishing our aims? Does anyone have a reasoned or paramount objection to the proposal? And what we mean by reasoned is not just an intellectual thing, but it's about, can everybody else in the group understand why the objection exists? If we can understand it, then we can work with it. If it's simply, I don't like the color blue, that's not a reason we can work with. It's just a personal preference. So we're looking at reasons that the group can own. And the third question is this proposal within everyone's range of tolerance? And I'm going to explain what tolerance means. So this range of tolerance, part of this comes from one of the other founders of Sociocracy. This man, named Gerard Endenberg, went to the Quaker school, which is where he picked up that sense of egalitarianism, and then he became an engineer and worked out the full picture of what Sociocracy is in an electronics parts company in the Netherlands. And so engineering has a lot of focus on feedback loops and words like range of tolerance. So in range of tolerance, we have our personal preferences. We have a range of, it's not my preference, but I can live with it, I can work with it. And we may have an objection. This proposal does not serve the aim of the group. In the context of, for example, my co-housing, cooperative housing living community where we have meals, I may have a personal preference for vegan or vegetarian meals, but I have a range of tolerance that includes meat being served at the meals, as long as there's also something vegetarian. Because I want to live with people, with a variety of people, some who will want to eat meat. On the other hand, if our community's intention is healthy living, then there might be an objection at the level of growth hormones, aspartame, chemicals in our food. Okay, there's going to be a certain level where we reach the point where there's an objection. So this is the dance of trying to understand our reactions to different proposals. Is it a personal preference? Can I accept, within my range of tolerance this proposal, or do I have an objection to it because if we approve this proposal, the work that we're trying to do is going to be in some way harmed, in some way made more challenged. I'll pass on. Well, actually, I'll go back to this. So that's the decision-making process. Let me see if I have another. Okay, right. There's a question of what if there is an objection? What can we do for objections? When there is an objection, the basic core thing is to look at the objection and see if the group can figure out how to resolve that objection. So we might again do a round where we look at where each person is speaking to how might we resolve this objection. It might be then that the facilitator or the original proposer amends the proposal. It might get referred to another group to revise the proposal some more. Okay. So that's the core of decision making, picture forming, proposal shaping, the actual consent decision making. How do we deal with objections? In any group, in any functioning group, there will be several different roles. The operational leader of the group, responsible for making, for the accountability of making things happen. That group's delegate to serve on a, I'll explain what a delegate means a little bit later. The facilitator of the group, who may not be the same person as the leader, and the secretary who's responsible for the informational database of the group, producing the minutes and so on. These roles are all selected through a decision-making process that's very similar to what I just described. So for selection process, we define the role. So let's say the role of facilitator. We define the term. Let's say it's 1 year. What are the qualifications? We can brainstorm those. Okay, typically we might say, oh, someone who's firm, someone who listens well, someone who can synthesize what people are saying. So we look at those qualifications, and then we're going to ask each person in this group who's going to be selecting their facilitator to name who they want to nominate for that role. So they'll fill out a form, or they might do it verbally. So I, Jerry, nominate Agnes to be the facilitator, and in a round I will say why I nominated Agnes, and then we'll hear from each of the other people in the group why they nominated whoever. So I nominated Agnes because she's a good listener, can synthesize well. Agnes might say I nominated Gerald because blah blah blah, and so on it goes. We hear from each person. Having completed that first round of nominations, then we'll do what we call the change round. Having heard the reasons for the nominations, do you want to change your nomination? Okay, I'm going to stay with Agnes, but Agnes might say, I'm going to change the nomination to herself because, and she'll fill out the reasons. So we're influenced by what people say. And as you notice, this is a completely open process. It is not secret ballot. It's basically picture forming. What are all the possibilities? We start going into the change round. That's proposal shaping. Who might we propose for this role? And that's what the facilitator does, or they may ask somebody else in the group to propose a candidate and say why they propose that particular candidate, and then initiate a consent round. If the group consents, we have a decision. If not, then we go back and look at, is there a way to turn the no into a yes? What's the objection? Perhaps we object to Agnes being the facilitator because we know that she's so busy doing so many other things. Well, a resolution to that might be that somebody else takes on some of the responsibilities that Agnes has, and that might turn the no into a yes, that now, with less responsibility, Agnes is able to fulfill this role. I think I won't go into discussion of consensus versus consent, but somebody can ask about that. So let me look now at structure. What we call the small group, what we call the working groups in sociocracy, we call them circles, because that kind of emphasizes the equivalence of people. In a traditional management structure, you have a management and several staff. So what sociocracy does for policy making is makes them all equal. So the manager and the staff, they may have those different roles, but when we set policy about how that group is going to function, they're operating as equals. Let's see, I'll pass. Well, again, typical organizational structure. You have a board, a CEO, you have managers, staff, even in worker-owned companies, most of the time you have this unless it's a small collective. And we make circles out of each kind of department. And then there's a circle that gets created. This is the people who associate together, right? The managers and the CEO. And there's another circle, the board and the CEO. So we're creating circle structure here for equivalent decision making about policy. The hierarchy can still function in terms of getting things done, but in terms of deciding how things will get done, what will get done, those things get decided in policy meetings where everyone's equal. Here's another way of looking at it. The management team is accountable for getting things done, and they are what we would call, the management team is what we would call the general circle. So here you see the executive director and 3 department leaders and their departments. We turn that into a policy-making circle, and now it includes not only the CEO and the department leaders, but it also includes the delegates from each of those departments. And those delegates are chosen by their department through the decision-making election process that we just talked about. And these decisions that happen here might include who is going to be the next leader of Department C. And in that decision-making, the Department C delegate has an equal voice to everyone else as to who's going to be the leader of their department. I know this is a lot of words, so we'll take some Q&A at the end, and you can have access to the slideshow and other information to kind of review what's been talked about in this sort of quick presentation. Any board of directors may have some external people, AIM expert. I won't go into this at this point, but can talk more about that later. So I want to emphasize this element of leaders and delegates, what we call the double link. When we only have a single link, it's usually top-down. Leaders get appointed top-down, you get told what to do. In sociocracy, in order to achieve equivalence, we have both top-down and bottom-up. Or if you like to say it this way, from the more abstract, broad perspective of a board to the more concrete, specific perspective of people who are on the shop floor, or the more direct service providers. So here we have 3 functional circles, A, B, and C. They have their members, the letter M, and they have a leader. The functional circle selects their delegate, and delegates serve on both the functional circle and they function on the general circle. So they are functional. They serve with their equivalent voice in both those circles. The circles in which they're doing their primary work, and then in the general circle, which is kind of the overview of the organization, the day-to-day overview. We'll see this better when I look at a co-op, a bakery co-op structure. We'll see this in more detail. So circles have their members, and they have leaders and delegates that are selected through equivalence process. Then the general circle, the day-to-day management, has its leader and delegate, and the leader and delegate serve on the board, or what we call the top circle. I'll pass through this to another slide. Let me pass through these. Okay, so I've just gone through the two of the three elements, the decision making and the organizational structure. The organizational structure being linked circles. And one of the key aspects that I didn't mention is that we're trying to drive decision making to the, in a sense, the most concrete level, the lowest level of the group, to make those decisions. So decisions are not being so much made at the higher levels of an organization, but at the lower levels. The workers get to make decisions about what they are doing, rather than having those decisions made on a higher level than them. The third element is feedback, the learning process. When I do workshops, I often have people stand on one leg and say, what do you notice? And if you stand on one leg, you notice that you're going to do a lot of kind of almost unconscious balancing to meet the aim of staying on one leg. That's the feedback process. If I then ask you to close your eyes while you're standing, you're going to find that it's much harder to stand with your eyes closed. Why? Because we've lost a whole element of feedback, the visual plane. So feedback is really key. And if you were blind for a long time, you would strengthen the other forms of feedback so that you are able to stand on one foot as a blind person much better than someone who is a seeing person. Strengthening the levels of feedback. In too many organizations, there is just the linear structure. Here's what to do, go do it. Lead, do. In Sociocracy, we want to make that into a circular process. So there is lead, there's do, but then there's measure. What is the effect of our doing? Evaluation, so that then we can generate a new leading, a new sense of direction based upon our experience. So there are multiple ways that we do this lead, do, measure process. For example, people have been selected to roles, whether it's leader, facilitator, or any other role in the organization. We go through that selection process, they carry out their role, and then we have a role review. We have a process of meeting with that person and talking about what they're doing well, what could be improved, and suggestions for improvement. This is not tied to salary. So it's not a punishment review. It really is the person self-reflecting on what they're doing well and what they could do better. The others who work with them in one role or another saying, yes, I do see that you do this well. And by the way, you also do this well. And yes, I do see that there is an area for improvement for you in that. And I see this other one that you didn't mention that I also think could use some improvement. And then the review group also goes round, in rounds again, talking about, okay, what suggestions do we have? Can we come up with some concrete ways for this person to do what they do well better and to do what they don't do so well better? And that becomes, written up as the review. Any policy that the organization makes, it gets made, it gets carried out. And then after a certain period of time, 6 months, a year, 5 years, we go back to that policy and go, okay, is this policy working for us? Again, that same kind of process. What's working well? What's not working so well about this policy? What suggestions do we have for improvement? So this is part of what we call it dynamic governance. Policies are not set in stone. They have term end dates, and we review them and improve them as we go. We make the best decisions over time by making many decisions. Which reminds me, something I didn't say earlier, just about the decision making. We've got a couple of slogans that we would use. We're not trying to make the perfect decision when we make a decision. We want to make a decision that's good enough for now, safe enough to try. So we can try it and then measure the effect and make a new decision based upon the information that we're getting. Many possible feedback loops. Any work circle has responsibility for a particular decision, but they can ask their general circle, their sort of higher level, more abstract level circle for feedback to help them make that decision. They can ask a lower level or a more concrete level group for feedback, help us make this decision. They can create an ad hoc group or helping circle to give them do some research and give them some feedback. They can put out surveys to the whole organization or other ways of salons with the whole organization. Hey, we're struggling with this issue, give us some input. So there are multiple ways of getting input, the feedback process towards making a decision. So those are the three elements: organizational structure of circles linked together, decision-making by consent, and continual adaptation feedback. Let's see if there's anything else I want to share here. What are the results? Traditionally, or typically, the results have been an improved organizational structure and internal communications, broader participation, because more people have more roles to play, emergence of new leadership, deeper trust among members, improved policymaking, improved accountability. Some of the challenges are that the people who are traditionally have power, because of their roles as managers, have to deal with letting go, sharing some of that power. On the other hand, people who traditionally haven't exercised power, they have to step up. They're being asked to step up and take some shared responsibility for decision making. So some of that can be challenging on both ends for the people who struggle with the issues of power over and people who struggle with the issues of power under, if you will. Who's doing it? Some healthcare groups, Science Pulse is a national scientific group, schools, for-profit businesses, my own consulting group, a number of intentional communities. And I'll say this maybe, but I'll come back because I have one more thing I want to share with you. In terms of more information, there is a book called We the People. That is a great book, and you can order it at sociocracy.info or on Amazon. You can visit the Sociocracy Consulting Group website, sociocracyconsulting.com, or the Sociocracy for All website, sociocracyforall.org. There's my name and phone number. And that's that. Okay. I want to share one other thing here. See if I can make this big. Where's full screen? Okay, you see that? This is the Scorcher Artisan Cooperative. It's a worker-owned co-op in Astoria, Oregon. They are a bakery, breakfast, lunch place. And so they have 4 working groups: the bread makers, the pastry makers, the back of the house, kitchen people, the front of the house, the ones who are doing the counter. So those are 4 distinct groups. They make policy for their own elements of work. So the pastry group makes its own policies about how they're making the pastry, what pastries they're making, etc. Each of those 4 working groups has a leader that is generally would be selected by the general circle. and has a delegate that is selected by the working group to serve on the general circle. So those 8 people, leaders and delegates of those 4 groups, plus the overall leader, the CEO or executive director or whatever of the organization, those 9 people form the general circle. And in the general circle, they're making decisions when things affect everybody, as opposed to just one sector of the organization. The general circle selects a delegate to serve on the board. So the board has at least 2 people from, in a sense, representing the working group, the leader and the delegate, because they're both staff members serving on the board. Since this is a worker co-op, there is a ownership interest as a worker co-op. Not everybody who works in the co-op is currently a worker owner. So all those who aren't worker owners, they're all involved in one of the working circles, but they may not have ownership rights yet. So the worker owners is another circle that has leader and delegate, and they have delegates that serve on the board, serving the financial kind of perspective of the interest of ownership. And then the board would have other people serving on their board. For example, this particular organization, the director of the Northwest Cooperative Development Center is one of the board members, because she has a bigger picture of cooperative development in the Pacific Northwest. And so there might be other people on the board. Perhaps somebody from the food co-op of that town. I think one of the members of the food co-op of Astoria is also on their board, because there's a link between the food co-op and the bakery. The bakery actually delivers bread to the food co-op. So there's the interlocking system of directorates, if you will, serving cooperation. I think I'll stop there with this presentation. And I can stop the share screen and look at, you can see me and we can ask questions.
Awesome.
So, Matt, you're going to kind of manage this process?
Yes. So I have some questions myself. I'm getting maybe a little bit of, I guess it's not. There's a little bit of feedback there for a moment, audio-wise. So again, to remind people, if you have questions that you would like to ask, you can post it on the event that's on the Vermont Employee Ownership Center's Facebook page, and also in that event is the link. So if you'd like to join the kind of the conversation, ask questions directly, you're welcome to do that. So I figured I'd start it off with I had one question in particular about kind of the delegate versus leader roles, for a little bit of more clarity. I could easily see how there's a certain level of tension seemingly between the two, where one is appointed from the top and one is kind of appointed by the group. Are there ever instances where there tends to be kind of like a convergence of those roles, or some what are some examples of the sort of scopes of action or responsibility that the delegate role in particular has? Because that's one that's definitely not as common.
So we can, in this structure, I mentioned the different kinds of roles: secretary, facilitator. The leader could be the facilitator, but the leader and the delegate have to be 2 separate people.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what serves the double link, that's what preserves equivalence. The leader is responsible for getting the stuff done. And if I ask the leader, how's things going in your department? Usually leaders would say, hey, they're going great. But we need to have full honesty. If we have the delegate from that department present, they can say, well, things aren't going, here's this or that issue. So it keeps the system more honest to have both roles present. And there are then 2 people, the delegate can bring to the higher level, or the general circle, the broader level, they can bring to that circle their experience of how policies are working in their department. yeah, we all made this decision, but here's what's really happening when we try to do it.
Hmm.
So they're kind of the voice of what's really happening on the ground. So they're bringing that voice to the broader level groups, to the, yeah. Whereas the leader is bringing information down, or, to the more concrete groups. Here's what the board of directors has said. Here's what the general circle is. Here's where we're going as a whole organization. Passing that information in that central direction to you. So it's both ways. Either if you think of it as top down, bottom up, or inside out, outside in, broad to concrete, concrete to broad. It carries both directions, and that is essential for maintaining a sense of equivalence within the organization. Otherwise, it's a traditional power over system.
And sort of related to that, another question I had was kind of about the scope of the general circle, because when thinking about that more traditional hierarchical organization, it seems like that's kind of a broadening out of the power that normally would reside in the general manager, but in some ways, specifically for worker co-ops, where you have that kind of lower level representation on the board, it seems like it might also kind of take some of the work that might be traditionally considered board work. So what where are the when thinking about sort of the parallels with more hierarchical structures, like where are the overlaps there?
Well, part of this, I guess, we would need to sort of clarify the size of the organization. Because we're talking about a worker co-op that's 6 people. They may not even have any work circles. They may just be one collective. And in that one collective, and they don't have a board, that in that one collective, they may be, if they're applying sociocracy, it may be mostly just the decision-making process and making sure that they have feedback going on. If you're getting to 12 people or 15 people, 20 people in the group, now you can no longer just function as a single group. There's not enough time to hear everyone's voice, and there's too many things that the organization needs to do, so you need to differentiate and have different work groups. Once you differentiate, then you need the process of leader, delegate, and and the feedback through those. You want to give as much empowerment to each working group as possible within the context of the aim of the whole. So what does this mean in terms of worker co-ops? Every role, every like what is the leader? What is the role of the director or the manager? That role would have a job description that's a policy. So the job description is determined by whatever level circle is responsible for that job description. So it's a consent decision about what the role is and what the powers and authorities are. So when maybe to put it in a different way, if the whole operation has a $200,000 budget, well, then maybe the bread circle in the context of the bakery example, the bread making circle, their budget might be, okay, you've got $30,000. That's your budget. You have authority to spend $30,000 as you see fit. If you want more than that, you're going to have to go to the general circle, because spending more than that is going to affect the whole operation. You take a whole budget, you divide it up pieces, and you go, okay, you can spend this much, you can spend that much, in the service of your aim, of your different departments. And you can give whatever authority to the circle or to the individual members of the circle, like the leader of that circle, to be in charge of that kind of spending, which then translates to the doing of the group. The manager has the authority to run their unit as is defined by the policy that the circle has set. So the circle says to the manager, okay, we agree, this is how it's going to be run, this is how you're going to lead us. And then that person leads. And then if it doesn't work out in some way, you have a circle meeting and go, this way of doing it is not working so well, let's change it a bit. And give you, a new improved sense of direction for how to lead us. Is that answering your question, Matt?
I think so. Yes.
I
It
think you
looks
also
like.
asked about the board level.
Mm-hmm.
So again, boards work in all different kinds of ways. There are the friends of the founder kind of boards, and then there are the micromanagement kind of boards, and the boards who, like, okay, they rubber stamp, but they don't really know what's going on. You know, it all depends upon what kind of organization we have and how well our boards are functioning. The boards, ideally, in Sociocracy, would be looking at the big picture. What's the 5-year plan? What's the 10-year plan? Are you staying true to the aims of the organization? Are you really operating sociocratically? Are you really producing a service that is really in the good of the people? Are you really operating internally in a way that works well for the workers? So it's a check. The board is kind of the big picture and the check that we are doing things in the way that we said we would like to do them. You know, they don't meet as often. You know, they meet several times a year, whereas the general circle is going to be meeting every week or every month, depending upon what the level of business is of the organization. More on that matter.
Well, it looks like we've got Susan on the line. Susan, you had a question?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My question is about the process during meetings and decision making. And I've used dynamic governance when I worked with the Austin Waldorf School. John Buck came down and was an active consultant with us. And my question is about the quick reactions round. What is the virtue of that, really? Why is that good?
What's the virtue of the quick reaction round? So the quick reaction round comes after the clarifying questions round. So we have a proposal presented, and immediately what's really important is that everybody understands the proposal and doesn't start arguing about different understandings of it. So at the point of quick reaction round, we all understand the proposal. The point of the quick reaction round is to gather feedback quickly, so that we don't have a prolonged debate. You can do several quick reaction rounds, but did 5 sentences or less is like, okay, now we get the feel for where we are. And if we have a complex proposal with 10 different points to it, in the quick reaction round, we'll find that, gee, everybody agrees on all 9 out of the 10 points. And there's huge disagreements of point number 10. That's useful to know really quickly, because then you can focus on that point number 10 and work it. If you don't know, what would happen in the consensus typical process is that instead of rounds, people would debate. And you could spend half an hour without realizing that pretty much everybody agrees. Or that there's a debate between 2 people about 1 point, and then you miss the fact that there's some other people in the group have disagreements about something else. But you've just spent an hour with 2 people debating something, and some silent person hasn't spoken up about yet something else.
Right.
So the reaction round gets everything on the table quickly, and then you can see from there what the implication of that is, how close you are to consent, or how much work might need to happen, etc.
That's clear. Thank you.
Good.
Cool. So one other question I had, just sort of thinking about this in terms of the frame of employee ownership, is so we have kind of these worker co-ops that are pretty structurally democratic, and then we also have sort of ESOPs, employee stock ownership plan owned companies that are more variable in terms of their kind of level of participation and you know, employee participation and governance in particular. So when thinking about kind of the way that one can kind of implement this and transition from something that's oftentimes maybe looking like a very traditional management structure to this, what does that sort of changing organizational learning process look like? Is it something that can be sort of implemented? There's certain elements that can be implemented first and people learn, or is it more of a system that kind of needs to be implemented all at once? Kind of what's that sort of bigger organizational change process look like?
The answer to that is so unique to each organization. because of its moment of history and its size and the willingness of any of the participants. In a larger organization like an ESOP, that might have quite a few people, if the top leadership says let's do this, then it's much easier for it to happen. I've been in too many organizations where some elements of the organization practice it, but the top leadership changes. There was a Waldorf school that was doing Sociocracy, and then the leader of the organization left, and bingo, that was the end of Sociocracy in that organization because the board hadn't fully bought into it. So the introduction is often with what we might call the change team. The organization is willing to explore this. You want to get a number of people in the organization exposed, like to watching this kind of video that we're producing right now, or go to a training program. So you want to, get as many people informed as possible, and develop. If the organization is clear that it wants to move forward, develop a change team to look at how we're going to go through the process of implementation. What else can I say about that? I mean, it's basically, finding your allies, finding the key enthusiastic people, lots of exposure, testing it out in one unit to see how it works, and getting a sense of, it's again that sense of safety of, let's not do something big, let's try it out somewhere, see how it works, and from there we can expand. That's a Socratic principle. Try something, learn from it. So there are multiple ways of doing that. Let's see, do I have something else to say about that? I think that's basically it. It's, ESOPs are a great example of, they're worker-owned in sort of numbers only, but not in real practice, many of them. So for me, bringing Sociocracy to an ESOP is just a wonderful thing. It would make it really a truly worker-run, not just employee-owned. And one other thing I want to say, because I didn't say much about economics, Sociocracy can work within in companies that have outside investors, and we have multi-stakeholder co-ops and co-ops that have outside investors now. And the way that works is that the investors who are not workers, they, in a sense, can be a circle of their own and have delegates who sit on the board of directors. So they have a voice, an equivalent voice to the other people on that board of directors. But they don't have control because it's by consent. So the investors cannot, we're going to sell this company and move it to Taiwan. They don't have that power because they don't control the company. The company is controlled by the decision-making of consent on the board of directors of that company, which has representation from the workers. So everybody would have to agree to move it to Taiwan. It couldn't just be an investor decision. So that's huge because that means we can keep our organizations, our companies local. They don't go away. If they're struggling financially, we can start exploring about how do we transition to a different product or a different service. How do we do something so that we keep the health not only of, the company needs to be healthy, it needs to be making enough money to survive, it needs to be making enough money so that its workers are doing okay, and it needs to be doing well enough so that the community in which it lives is thriving. And, from my perspective, it needs to be producing things that are useful for the world and not, not junk. The other aspect around the economics is that the workers get a fixed rate of return for their work, their salary. They also get a variable rate of return depending upon how well the company is doing. I mean, that would be typical for a worker-owned company. You've got some money, and then depending on how well things are going, you get some extra, or not. In this context, the investors also get a fixed rate of return. Whatever it is, 3%, 6%, something. And then they also get a variable rate of return according to how well the company is doing, because they have put their money on the line to try to support the success of this company. So both the investors and the workers then have a shared interest in the organization working well and all the parts of the organization working well, because every part that works well benefits everybody else, investors and workers alike, in some way. And again, those percentages and how those financial numbers are figured out, that's policy that gets set by consent by whatever circle is given the authority to work on that area. To me, that's the exciting piece. I can imagine a transformed society with organizations that are working this way for the common good, interlinked circles within the organization, interlinked with other organizations in their geographic communities, interlinked with other organizations that have similar products, you know, like the farm-to-table kind of level. There's cooperative farms, there's food co-ops, there's transportation co-ops. They're all interlinked, and so on.
So we have a few questions online. One of them kind of dovetails a little bit, but someone was asking for a little clarification on consensus versus consent. And the person, Roger, also had the question of how do you decide if an objection is valid, and who makes that decision?
Yeah, good questions. Let me see if I can pull up this slideshow again. Well, I think I won't try to do that. I'll get to my slides so that I can talk about it. So the criteria of decision making, the essential one is, does this decision support the aim of our circle, of our working group? We have this product or service to deliver. Will this decision help us or not help us? And so when somebody objects to a proposal, it's based upon that. They'll say, you know, I don't think it's a good idea for us to only serve at the bakery, to only serve wheat products. You know, times are changing. There's so many people who don't deal with gluten well. I think this policy of only serving wheat products is harming us. I think we should have gluten-free products as well. You know, so that's the aim, is to serve the community. An objection to wheat-only, you know, restaurant for the reasons that we want to serve the community. So that we can make sense of. So it is giving a reason that the whole group can own, not necessarily agree with. We can go like, okay, I hear that reason. Now, what can we do with it? Which is different from the preference perspective. You know, I want everybody to be vegan. Well, that's your preference. You know, unless we're a vegan restaurant, intentionally, that's not going to work here. We're not going to have the level of customers that we want. We're not going to have the kind of open community in our town that we want, because we want people who are not vegans to also come to our restaurant. So depending upon your aim, if you want to do a vegan restaurant, fine, that's great. Within that framework, that makes sense. But if you're serving the whole community, then vegan becomes a preference and not the core of, you know, it becomes a preference, and you have to figure out what your range of tolerance is, you know, what you mean by healthy living. Yeah. So maybe we don't import pork from China, but we do serve pork that's locally grown. You know, okay, some of us don't like to have meat, but you know, now we're thinking more about the whole localvore process, you know, and growing local meat, and maybe it's better to have local meat than to import tofu from China because of all the environmental energy questions. So, you know, we're constantly trying to shift in how we think about that. What else to say about that? The difference between consensus and consent. That's a difficult one because many people would disagree whether there is any difference. Consent is kind of a form of consensus. What both consensus and consent value everyone's voice. Consensus, depending upon the group that uses it, often asks, do we agree? whereas consent asks, do you object? That's kind of a different level, different bar. It's easier to try something, you know, like, okay, it's not my preference, but let's try it, versus, well, I don't agree with this, and unless I agree with it, we can't do anything. There is also no standard on what defines consensus as a process. There are many different ways of doing consensus, you know, from the last person sitting in the room version to formal consensus, which is much closer to what consent would be. You know, within sociocracy, the consent process is a very defined process. And by the level of definition of the process, it also supports equivalence. If you've been through consensus meetings, a lot of them actually do not support equivalence in process. In theory, everyone has a yay or nay in the decision making, but in the actual process of the meeting, some people dominate and some people don't get heard because they don't necessarily use the process of go-arounds and the attention to the equivalence of every voice.
All right, so there's another online question here. This is from Barbara. We're getting a little feedback again. So the question is about proposal forming. I've been involved in 2 organizations that have tried to use Sociocracy, and one of our members wants to throw out 20 or more ideas for each proposal in the interest of thinking as broadly as possible. Great idea in the abstract, but I found this can be very time-consuming, and he and others want to go through the ideas in detail. We often don't even get to actually forming a proposal because we're caught in the pre-proposal forming. We've been stuck without moving forward on policies that have felt needed to change because of this procedure. So, thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one of them is, there's the whole feedback process at the end of each meeting. What went well about this meeting? What could be improved? So there's a feedback process of, gee, Joe, when you do this in these meetings, it's really frustrating because we don't get the work, that we'd like to see done. So there's some feedback to that individual that's happening in the process of evaluating of the meeting. So that requires a level sense of honesty and courage in giving feedback. If you don't do that, then it's really hard for people to learn or change. So that's one aspect of it. The other is, so if you're going through the first phase is the naming of the elements. Anybody can say at this point, like, okay, let's not name 500 elements. Let's just name sort of the top 20 at some point. Or it's like, let's say this is good enough for now, that we've named enough, and if something else comes up, we'll deal with it when it comes up. But let's stop the brainstorming of elements here. Let's just do 2 go-arounds of naming elements, not 10 go-arounds. And often we name those elements in go-arounds. So each person gets to name 1, and we might do a couple of go-arounds, and at that point everybody else is done except for Joe, who's still got 40 more. And you can say, Joe, at this point, in the interest of moving on, can you be willing to let this go? And if more issues come up, we'll bring them in the next stage. The next stage is the proposal shaping. We're doing a go-round, and each person is saying a piece of the decision. Talking about dog policy. Well, I think that owners should pick up after their own dog's poop. That's my turn. Now it's Matt's turn. So Matt says, well, I think this. Now I think there shouldn't be any dogs greater than 45 pounds in the community. Okay, now it's Susan's turn. She says, well, I think there shouldn't be any dogs more than 25 pounds in the community. And we just go on. We can name things that are not in agreement because we're just naming potential pieces of the proposal. And I guess here's the question that, okay, we've done several rounds, but one person still has 40 more ideas. And again, I guess as facilitator, I would say, can we just work with this set of ideas that we have right now? Good enough for now so that we can try and see what we can get to, and then we can see if there's other stuff that hasn't been dealt with. The proposal ideas are all also related to the initial elements that we named. So we want to make sure that we have some proposal for each of the elements that we named originally. There's got to be some proposal about the barking issue. Or we can say, well, let's drop the barking issue from this process. We'll deal with it separately, or we won't deal with it at all. Do that intentionally. But every element that we brainstormed originally has some proposal piece that's sort of connected to it. So we're checking. Every element has a proposal piece. And then when you can then send that list of proposals, of proposal pieces, to 1 or 2 people to develop. So if this person's got 40 things, it's like, okay, write those 40 things down, give it to Susan and Matt, and they're going to come up with a proposal statement. And it will in some way include or not include what you said, but they'll be intentional about that and report intentionally about what they've done with that. And then when you have the proposal, you put it out. You can put things in the proposal that are contradictory. There will be no dogs over 45 pounds in the community and no dogs over 25 pounds in the community, and there will be no limit on the size of dogs in the community, and that's just in there. You just throw all that in there, even some contradictions. Then when you do your quick reaction round, you'll find out that there's only one person who cares about the size of dogs, or 2 people, and what is their concern. So you can start narrowing down where you need to pay attention. If nobody cares except for one person about the size of dogs, then that one person who cares about the size of dogs will like, okay, I see that this isn't an issue for other people. Really what the size of dog for me is not really so much about the size of the dog, but about my sense of safety. Okay, so now we're looking at, right, it's not really about the size of dog. A little tiny dog can bite really painfully, and a really big dog can be really, really gentle. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's the issue of safety. Okay, I can let go my thing about the size of dog. It's really important to me that we have policies about training of dogs, about what happens if a dog does something, that it does an immediate action around that, that the dog is banished from the community, or there's, like 3 strikes and you're out. You can't have a dog that's bitten. I mean, once a dog bites a human being, you've got a problem. So there's got to be some stuff in place that happens as a result of that, that deals with the safety issue, which is maybe the underlying need around the size. And Matt, before the session, Matt was asking me, I can't remember what you were asking me, but I started talking about nonviolent communication as another element that I like to bring into organizations. In nonviolent communication, we're looking at what are the needs that are underlying the strategies that we come up with. So the 45-pound dog thing is a strategy, but what's the need underlying that might be that need of safety. And everybody's got a need for safety. So at that level, we can join, and then we can see, okay, what strategy could we do that would meet the need of safety that would allow us to have dogs in the community. So how do we collectively figure out ways to most effectively meet everyone's needs to the extent that we can?
Another question, sort of a follow-up on the sort of validity of objections from Roger, who asked follow-up. If the group doesn't, what if the group doesn't agree about the validity of an objection, about whether the objection is personal versus being relevant to the circle's aim?
Yeah. So no one person in the group, not the leader, not the facilitator, has the authority to declare, somebody's opinion as invalid. That belongs in the whole group. If the whole group, if you do a go-around, what do we do about Joe's objection here? And everybody else in the group says, gee, this doesn't make any sense to me. What we've got here will work, or is good enough to try. And Joe is still saying, it doesn't work for me. I mean, partly, and I just had a meeting last night where we had one person objecting. After they heard everyone else speaking, they said, okay, I hear that this is only my concern. I will let go of my objection, and there's some issues, some needs of mine that relate to this objection that I will bring up in a different context. Because it's really about a bigger issue, not about this particular issue. And I want that bigger issue addressed. So I won't hold this particular issue hostage to this
Right.
concern that I have about this bigger issue. I will bring that into its proper venue. And that allowed that person to let go of the objection, having also heard that everybody else was comfortable except for them. If the group cannot make a decision, then that decision goes to the next broader or higher level circle. So if in the Joe's in the Scorcher Bakery, if the pastry group can't make a decision, they're stuck, then that decision goes to the general circle for them to make. In that general circle, you have the leader and delegate of the pastry group in that group, so their voices and the concerns are held, but the decision can get made. And again, if they can't make a decision in the general circle, then it goes to the board level. And if they can't get made at the board level, hopefully you have some other fallback where, okay, at that point we have a vote, or at that point we go to mediation, or we have an arbitrator decide, because you always need to be able to make a decision. One of the things that I struggled with in our own community, my co-housing community, before we did Sociocracy, was that consensus, the energy required to bring a decision from inception to conclusion was so great, was that we didn't have a problem with objections. We had a problem with nobody making proposals. Because, like, hey, do I want to devote a year of my life to helping this community decide whether or not to renovate the basement of our common house? I don't think so, because I know how much of a struggle that's going to be. And so people just stopped making proposals because it was just too onerous. And that's where consensus then became a conservative decision-making process. Not conservative in the right-left politics version of conservative, but conservative in that it was really hard to make change. It conserved what was. It was not dynamic.
So we have another question here about accountability. So, like, when things don't happen in sociocracy, how does that tend to be dealt with? Are there certain specific ways that are inherent to the system?
Well, accountability really all goes back to a feedback process. You know, what have there been benchmarks? You know, have there been some stated assumptions? You know, some statements about this is what's going to get done. When it doesn't get done, then there needs to be a feedback process of, okay, let's look at this work process or this particular role that this person's playing, and look at what's been working well, what's not working so what could be improved about it, so that we can see how to break through the account of, you know, what is not functioning. When somebody is not getting their job done, why is that happening? Let's explore that. And so the role improvement review or performance improvement review, did I talk about that earlier? I can't remember. Where we talk about what are you doing well, what could be improved, suggestions for improvement. So we look at that. It might also mean, you know, gee, you know, as operational leader of our kitchen, there's too many things that are falling through the cracks, and it's not working for us. So let's select a different leader. So you have your choice in, you know, new leadership, you know, new person playing that role in which they're not fulfilling, you know, they're not fulfilling what they should be accountable for. Ideally, all these things, you know, the more specific you are about outlining what your responsibilities are, the clearer it is if someone's meeting their responsibilities or not. So improve their performance or change who's responsible for that particular task.
One other question that I had that's sort of related to you know, the implementation is kind of the almost like process literacy component. You know, I feel like I know of examples of you have sort of a system of running things that has certain rules, and you have people coming in who, you know, who have been socialized into a very different way of relating to each other. Mm-hmm. So, you know, in terms of your experience, and, you know, obviously it's going to depend on the community, but you know, what are some of the challenges in terms of, you know, socializing people into the system, and and building buy-in and building the skills necessary to really operate effectively within it? And like, what are kind of maybe some of the barriers to doing that?
Good question. Sociocracy is a different way of doing things than what most of us are used to. So without an ongoing feedback process and without ongoing training, we're going to be likely to revert back to whatever old way we used to do it. So ongoing training, ongoing education is critical. The orientation process for new people joining the organization is critical. They all need to have their orientation, and they need to watch this video, for example. They need to do things to get themselves up to speed in terms of how the organizational dynamic works. I would say there's 3 development pieces that every individual in an organization needs to be, in a sense, committed to. Part of the organization needs to be committed to. One is how governance works. Everybody needs to understand that so they can play their role. Second is how communication works. Everybody needs to keep on developing their skills about that. Again, that's why I mentioned nonviolent communication as one of those processes that might help communication skills. And the third is, what's the content of your work? The knowledge about bread making or carpentry or finances, whatever you are responsible for or your organization is responsible for, that you keep developing your expertise in that area. So continuing development in all those 3 areas is critical. Did I answer your question, or was there another element to that I didn't respond to?
No, I think that kind of covered my question there. And we have another one coming in here. So the question is, a board member personally objects to the person in a circle chooses to be that delegate or in that delegate role. The rest of us felt that this was not a valid objection, but we ended up without a delegate because of that individual's adamant stand. So it's a situation like that where, where people sort of who are going to be part of that higher level working group object to the choice of the lower level circle. Like how is that sort of dealt with?
Yeah. So let me just step back a bit first and say that sociocracy, decision made by the socials, those who work together. You have to have choice about who is in your circle. So the individual chooses to join the circle chooses to have that individual join the circle. That is true for both organizations where people are hired. You get hired to join a particular unit. It's also true for volunteer organizations. You can't just volunteer to be in a group. The group has to accept you as its member. So that's part of the accountability, because you can also remove somebody. You can fire somebody. You've got a process for how you do that. You can also, in a sense, fire or remove a volunteer from a circle. So likewise, leaders and delegates are being chosen to serve in a different circle than the one they're coming from. That circle has choice about whether or not to accept them. So yes, the board has a choice as to whether or not to accept the delegate from the general circle. They can say, well, gee, there's some issues with this delegate. Can you please give us another choice? Give us another person, a different person. And so then the general circle can meet, select a different delegate, and the board can say, okay, this works for us. So you can always do that. Now, if there is tension, one member of the board is objecting to a delegate and everyone else is in agreement, there's something else going on. To me, that involves some more. So take it to a higher level. It's okay. Let's stop talking about this particular person. Let's talk about our dynamics here. What's going on? What's behind this issue? What's the need that this board member is expressing in wanting to reject this particular delegate? There's something more at stake here that needs to be understood. Go there. And another possibility is that the board could decide to remove the board member. Maybe it's not the delegate that's the problem. Maybe it's the board member that's the problem. I don't know. But that's an option that's on the table. But I would say you need to seek to understand what the needs are and how then can we best meet that need. I once, as a board member, objected to somebody joining the board because I had information that other people didn't have, and I actually couldn't say what it was, but I knew something about some illegal activity that they had been involved with, and I did not want that person on the board. So in that case, I could say that much. It's like, I could say some things. It's like, I have a reason. This is what it's about. I can't tell you the details because that's not appropriate for that particular context. But I have a safety and security of our organization issue here.
I have a question about that. Is this appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
You're raising a good point there, Jerry. So the danger in anyone saying, I've got a secret that you can't know about this situation,
Mm-hmm.
that could be abused.
Yes.
And I guess our responsibility is simply to be on the lookout for abuse, but to allow that kind of justification, even if we can't verify it?
Yeah, well, then I would look for what's a way of verifying that. Is there a way of verifying that? Okay, I'm holding this information. I'd be willing to tell one person who will also hold confidentiality. I will explain to them, here's what I saw, here's what I know about, and then have that person report back to the board. It's like, I've heard what Jerry said. Hearing what he said, I join in the concern. So something that doesn't just spill a particular piece of information to a whole big group. Is there a way to do that?
Thank you.
Yeah. Secrets destroy organizations.
Yeah.
So and transparency is core to sociocracy. Transparency, obviously in how we select people to roles, because we're saying, here's, I'm nominating this person, here's why. All that is open and transparent. Our evaluations of people, and how you're doing your job, that's all transparent. Evaluations of how the meeting's going, that's all transparent. The financial aspects of the organization need to all be transparent. Everything, all the minutes of each unit of the organization are accessible to everybody else in the organization. There's no secret minutes. It's all accessible. So all information needs to be accessible to all the members of the organization. There are some cases where there is, like product secrets. Here's how we make Coca-Cola. That's a product secret. You don't necessarily share that with the world. So there are some elements of that are appropriately held within a smaller group. But that, again, that's a policy. This particular piece of information will be held privately by this circle because it's not in the interest of the organization to have this be public.
So I think we've got time. So I've got one more question, and then maybe we can wrap up. But this is sort of applicable to the intersection with the employee ownership piece, which is that for instance, that worker co-op model has a circular flow of power in many ways structurally, where you have the employee owners who elect the board of directors and who comprise generally the board of directors, which then hires and fires management, which then hires and fires employees. So you have this circular flow, and it seems like in such a flow you have the opportunity for people to be part of multiple circles. Mm-hmm. And so for instance, someone could both be an employee in a particular group and also a board member. And so how does the system deal with perhaps role overlap? Where I assume you can only be a delegate or a leader of one of the circles probably, or could you have multiple, like how does that fit in?
You can be a leader of multiple groups you're a staff of 12, and your executive director leads 2 groups, and somebody else leads the other 2 groups. That's perfectly okay. The working groups. So you can have, anybody can play multiple roles as long as you don't mix the leader and delegate together. But if I'm in multiple circles, I could be the delegate from 2 different circles to serve in the general circle. That's okay. Everything is working transparently and by consent, so that's what protects us from abuse of power. There can be an issue with an organization that has many circles and few people. So that is a time management question, and what we can, like somebody, you could just, again, the feedback process of limit yourself to less circles because you're not being able to handle all those responsibilities. It involves meeting time. So what is the organization's view of how much time is being spent in meetings versus what's being done? We only need 3 people to make these decisions. We don't need 6 people serving on this circle. So let's not have everybody sitting there. What is the minimum number of people that can do an effective job that has the trust of everybody in the organization? Not when we have one example in my co-housing community. I'm on what's called a community life circle. We have a sub-circle of ours which is called care and counsel. They'll deal with conflict issues. The leader of that group, in theory, serves on the community life circle, and he's the one who's been appointed to be the delegate to serve on the general circle. That would mean he'd be going to 3 meetings, 3 circle meetings, and that becomes too much for him. So he does not actually come to the community life meetings unless we ask him to. We've got a topic, we need you here for this one, and then he comes. But that way he doesn't have to go to all 3 meetings. We keep, there's enough information flow back and forth so that he keeps being informed. He's not out of the loop, but he doesn't have to go to all 3 meetings. So you can do things like that. Is that helpful?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. That clarifies it for me. All right. So we're almost at 1:30. So I figure, do you have any final thoughts or things that have been left unsaid before we sign off?
Partly just what are next steps for people who want to learn more. So one is the book, We the People. You can order through sociocracy.info or through Amazon. Sociocracyforall.org. Go to that website and you'll see events that we're doing. I will be in Providence, Rhode Island in September 26th, I think in the evening, doing a presentation kind of like this one, live, in person. I will be in New York September 17th and 18th doing one-day workshops in Brooklyn, all-day workshops. So that's the kind of things you can do. Sociocracy for All also does occasional webinars. We're focusing one on facilitating. So facilitation webinar, which is happening, I think later in August. If you go to sociocracy.org, you can see when that is, and you can sign up for it. That one's free. The one in Providence, I think, is $10. The one in the day-long workshops in Brooklyn are sliding scale. So Sociocracy Consulting. .com. That's the website for Sociocracy Consulting Group. We there also have series like on facilitation or foundations for sociocracy. Those are seminars that cost money, series online, and then there's workshops. You can also host us, bring us to your organization, and we'll do a workshop for your organization or into your town. Or your church or whatever organization. You can bring multiple people from different organizations together, and we can do a workshop for you. 1:29. We got the 1 minute left here.
Cool.
So.
All right. Well, yeah. So for folks who came in late, this was the. Okay, I'm gonna mute you. Get a little feedback here. Yeah, for folks who came in late, the full video should be posted shortly. I think it's actually posted automatically on the Vermont Employee Ownership Center's YouTube channel, and we'll also put it on our website, veoc.org, and the and the Facebook page. So so the full discussion will be and presentation will be viewable there. So and we're trying to do more of these, kind of getting interesting ideas out to the employee ownership community. So keep an eye on that. And Jared, and thank you, Jerry, for taking the time to share your insight and wisdom on this front. So in the meantime, I'm Matt Kropp. I'm the Program and Outreach Coordinator for VEOC, and thank you for tuning in. So I'm going to